Good morning, and welcome to part two of our Subchapter M discussion this morning. This one offering more of a focus on dry docks and internal structural exams. I'm John Scholberg, editor of the Waterways Journal, and before we begin, I just want to thank Simplex Americas for sponsoring this session. Now I'll pass it over to our moderator, Chris Parsonage. Chris is the executive director of TVIB, the Towing Vessel Inspection Bureau. Chris, you have the floor.
Thanks, John. And thank you to the Waterways Journal and to you and Nelson for allowing us to participate in this panel this morning. And I want to make sure that everybody realizes that the purpose of this panel has moved a little bit from the shipyard focus to more having to do with the upcoming dry dock and internal structural exams that many operators are starting to contemplate having to do. As you know, the industry is entering its third year of the phase-in period for Subchapter M, and those vessels that have obtained a COI have 5 years to conduct their first dry dock and internal structural exam survey, 2.5 years for vessels that are operating primarily in saltwater. There's a number of issues and unanswered questions about exactly how this is going to work. And what the role of the Coast Guard and the TPOs and internal surveyors and so forth, and how all those things are going to interact and come to making sure that vessels are in compliance. Section 137.330A describes the scope of the dry dock inspection for all vessels, regardless of whether they're TSMS or Coast Guard option. And Section 137.330B describes the scope for the internal structural examination. There isn't a lot in the regulation about the internal structural exam in particular. There's a little bit more on the specifics for the dry dock, but it leaves an awful lot of room for interpretation, both by the Coast Guard and by the survey, at least in my personal opinion. So what we're trying to do is think about helping operators think about how they may schedule their vessels for these required examinations so as to avoid interruptions to their operations, and also to budget appropriately for correcting deficiencies that will be discovered during these surveys. Our hope is that people already have a pretty good idea where their vessels stand, because as we all know, inland towing vessels go up on dry dock pretty frequently. It's not like ships where a 5-year dry docking is really maybe the only time that they've gone up. All of our towing vessels seem to go up for a variety of reasons periodically. But anyway, this is a big deal, and people need to really be prepared for getting ready for this part of Subchapter M, and quite frankly, it may be the most painful part of Subchapter M in terms of the cost to upgrade equipment that is seen better days or that needs to have modifications made to it. What I wanted to focus on is that for TSMS option vessels, and that's really what I'm speaking to more today, and that is that the TSMS is really your guiding document, and the TSMS needs to really flesh out how the company is going to conduct their surveys, what elements are going to be looked at, and it was very helpful for the company to establish standards for each of the vessels in their fleet. At what point is the company at a point where they should be replacing bottom plate? Adopt some type of standard or guidance for the surveyor that is actually conducting the survey. So when they see it, they know whether the company is complying with their own intentions as to regard to that vessel. Same thing with shafts and rudders and all the other parts of the hull and the internal structure for framing and so forth. At what point is the company comfortable continuing to operate, and at what point do they need to start making modifications, repairs to the vessel? In the absence of that being specified in the TSMS, it's really left up to the surveyor to say what he thinks needs to be done at any given point in time, which may not give you the greatest predictability as to how things are going to be conducted. And we know that port engineers carry around a lot of this information in their head, and they know it when they see it. Somehow we need to get that information out of the port engineer's head and down on a piece of paper so the Coast Guard can say, well, you're complying with your TSMS, so if your TPO says it looks reasonable, then you're good to go. Obviously, you have to meet the minimum requirements, but there's a pretty wide range on the minimum requirements. And quite frankly, a lot of the ABS standards would allow you to operate with plate and framing that really wouldn't be adequate, and probably most operators would not want to be there. So anyway, we've got a very good panel of folks. Most of these folks were on the previous call and had been introduced in more depth. I will just briefly say that we're being joined by Caitlin Stewart, the Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs, the American Waterways Operators, Captain Tracy Phillips, 8th District Chief of Prevention, the United States Coast Guard. We've got Robert Keister, Vice President, Sabine Surveyors, and Tab Foray, President and co-founder of the Towing Vessel Inspection Bureau. Caitlin, if you could kind of just kick this off and tell us a little bit about the work that AWO has been doing on the best practices and trying to give guidance to your membership, how that came to be, and we'll start off there.
That sounds good. Thank you very much, Chris. And hello again to those of you who are with us for this morning's first session. So I'm going to spend a few minutes, as Chris has asked, talking to you about AWO's best practices for inland hull inspection and repair. And I'd like to begin by looking at what has led us to embark on the development of the best practices. So I put together a bit of a timeline that you'll see on your screens now. This all really can be traced back to 1968 when the Coast Guard published what remains the applicable agency guidance on steel hull inspection and repair, NAVIC 768. And then, over 40 years later, the Coast Guard published the Subchapter M notice of proposed rulemaking. By this time, the Coast Guard and AWO had, under our safety partnership, stood up what was then called the Bridging and Implementation Team, or BAIT, which sought to anticipate and proactively address, among other things, areas in which current towing industry practice may not be consistent with current Coast Guard guidance. And that was applicable to other classes of inspected vessels, of course, towing vessels not yet being inspected. And inland towing vessel inspection repair was definitely on that list. So BAIT's working group number 5 convened a subgroup on inland towing vessel inspection and repair, which released its report the following year after the proposed rule was published in 2012. And really what they were intending was that they would give the Coast Guard time to modify existing guidance documents or to draft new guidance documents that were needed before Subchapter M was implemented, or as Subchapter M was being implemented. The Coast Guard wanted to get more input from the towing industry community, so the agency tasked the Towing Safety Advisory Committee with reviewing the subgroup's report. A subcommittee was established to do so, and that subcommittee endorsed the BAIT Working Group number 5 subgroup's report and made a few recommendations of their own. Their recommendations were approved by TSAC in 2014. And then in 2016, the Coast Guard published the final rule establishing a towing vessel inspection regime under 46 CFR Subchapter M. But notably, you do not see here between 2011 and 2016, or since 2016, that the Coast Guard has not modified existing guidance and has not drafted new guidance. And so this all led us to last summer when the AWO Towing Vessel Inspection Working Group raised the issue of some Coast Guard inspectors' inconsistent expectations for companies to establish and implement procedures to effectively address a suite of issues, really, surrounding inland hull inspection and repair. We broached the issue, AWO did, of creating a set of best practices with our TPO partners at our annual TPO Summit last August. And they agreed that doing this would be an effective exercise to ensure that TPOs, the Coast Guard, and industry are all aligned in their definitions of good marine practice regarding inland hull inspection and repair. So, consistent with the AWO Towing Vessel Inspection Working Group's goal of facilitating the smooth implementation of Subchapter M, the new subgroup was tasked with developing a voluntary set of best practices for inland towing vessel hull inspection and repair that AWO members may use to incorporate into their TSMIS these procedures that Chris has discussed, and to implement them through their survey programs. And I want to stress that this was really intended to be a sort of a helpful exercise for members who are looking for a place to start. So the voluntary part is important. It's also important to know that this subgroup that's been set up is inclusive. We've got AWO members who are operating on the rivers and on the intercoastal waterways. We also have our TPO partners involved, our affiliate members who bring subject matter expertise in naval architecture, and we have members of our RCP standards board. So again, a comprehensive group who is trying to put together these best practices just to help guide decision making for companies that are looking for that assistance, and also to help facilitate alignment between the industry and the Coast Guard on what constitutes best marine practice. So, some of the key principles of the best practices as they've been developed so far. The first is that companies operating inland towing vessels should implement an internal or external survey program, as they're required to do under the TSMS option of Subchapter M, that examines the condition of the vessel hulls on a regular basis. So, for example, as part of your required annual surveys and your once in 5 year dry dock and ISE exams. Also, when repairs are required, companies should establish procedures for evaluating what repair and what time frame is appropriate in consideration of key factors of risk management, the probability of failure, the consequences of failure, and the cost effectiveness or cost benefit of proposed alternatives. Another key principle, which is not really articulated in the best practices themselves, but more so in the narrative around them, is that our subgroup has talked a lot about how the towing vessel fleet, the inland towing vessel fleets, generally comprise of long-lived vessels that have really no significant history of hull failure. Going back to that BAIT working group number 5 subgroup, that group had examined casualty data for this population of vessels. They had done a shipyard survey. They had looked at a number of inputs from the Ship Structural Committee and from ASTM and other places. And I think that what we see, sort of taking all of those inputs together, is that these vessels, they operate in a freshwater environment that produces less hull deterioration, as we all know, than a saltwater environment. And in general, provided an inland towing vessel's hull condition, their operation, or their history of satisfactory service, together with their owner or operator survey program, which, as Chris mentioned, is going to have the oversight of a TPO, provided that all of that doesn't cause the integrity of the hull to be questioned by the Coast Guard or a TPO, the company should generally be permitted to manage the vessel according to its established procedures. Again, those procedures need to be established and they need to be looked at by the TPO and by the Coast Guard. But the subgroup talked a lot about how this is really a safe segment of the industry, generally speaking, as long as those conditions are met. I'm now going to review the sections of the best practices, sort of the issues that are covered within the best practices. Those are use of doubler plates for repairs, monitoring and managing unintentional water in void spaces, the repair of set-ins, the repair of internal structural members, monitoring and managing steel wastage, testing of repairs, and welding standards and welder qualifications. And none of this is reinventing the wheel. Again, this most recent subgroup took as its starting point the BAIT working group number 5 subgroups report, the TSAC report, the ASTM and ABS standards, and this is really reflected in the document. It really is intended to sort of capture what is already accepted and widespread best marine practice. There's nothing here that should require companies that have been keeping up with best marine practice to make radical changes to their procedures. We shared these best practices with the Coast Guard earlier this year. Again, our intention is to make sure that we are aligned with the agency so that anyone implementing these best practices can have the confidence that the Coast Guard is not going to object to any of the procedures that they've adopted. So the Coast Guard, both the Office of Commercial Vessel Compliance and the Office of Design and Engineering Standards at Coast Guard headquarters, have provided us with some feedback, in particular on the use of doubler plates as permanent repairs, and also in terms of monitoring and managing water and voids. So following further conversations with our subgroup, we have submitted a revised document to the Coast Guard, and we're waiting for their response on that before promulgating the best practices. The other thing that we're waiting for, we understand that Coast Guard headquarters is working on a new guidance document related to the use of doubler plates. Since NAVIC 768 was published, I think that a lot of the thinking around the use of doubler plates as permanent repairs has changed with a report in the mid-2000s from the Ship Structural Committee and revision to ASTM standards. I think those were in the mid-2010s. And so the Coast Guard knows that those developments have occurred and is reflecting on whether they want to update their guidance in NAVIC 768 to reflect those changes. So we are hoping to have some updated guidance or some direction from the Coast Guard with respect to where they want to head with that, so that we can incorporate it into this best practices document. So I will stop there. I also meant to mention at the start and did not that this is not my area of expertise. I am very much a learner who is reliant on the expertise of our members and our TPO partners with respect to this issue. So I'm going to let the true experts take over. If you have any questions about our best practices, though, I would be happy to answer them during the Q&A. So back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Caitlin. That was a very nice overview of how all that came together and how those standards were put in place. I'd like to next go to Captain Phillips and Captain, get your thoughts about best practices and where you think this will ultimately fit into the Coast Guard's interpretation of requirements and guidance for marine inspectors. Are they going to be aware of these best practices, and are they going to refer to those when they're looking at vessels to see whether companies are actually performing at the industry standard?
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. Wanted to start off this morning by just talking a little bit about some of the Coast Guard's expectations when it comes to dry docks and internal structural exams, and then address some of the questions that you've raised, Chris. So to start off with, we'll talk about Coast Guard option vessels. If you are a Coast Guard option vessel, the local OCMI will attend the vessel during any dry dock exam or internal structural exam. The Coast Guard inspector will look at all the items that are listed in 137.330. Much like Chris mentioned in his introduction, he's encouraging companies to incorporate as part of their TSMIS procedures and processes and decision points when it comes to conducting dry dock work. And I encourage Coast Guard option vessels to also do the same thing. It's a much different picture when the Coast Guard inspector arrives on your vessel and you have a clear process and a plan for your dry dock, and you have decision points and really thoughtful information about when you're going to replace plate on your vessel, when you're going to pull shafts, other things that would come along with a dry dock exam. This is if the Coast Guard inspector arrives and your company does not have any of those processes or procedures in place, and the response is, Coast Guard, tell me what I need to do. So those are two much different pictures, and you can imagine the Coast Guard inspector is probably going to pay a lot more attention and do a lot more thorough investigation of every aspect of your dry dock exam if you don't have a process or procedure in place. So moving over to vessels that are using the third-party option. If you're a third-party option, the Coast Guard attendance is not required at a dry dock or an internal structural exam. If you are a third-party option vessel and you're using the external survey program, the TPO must attend your dry dock or internal structural exam. If you're a third-party option and you're using the internal survey program, you do have to notify the TPO, and you also have to notify the cognizant OCMI before you conduct a credit dry dock exam or internal structural exam. The TPO and the Coast Guard may or may not attend those exams. After you conduct your dry dock or your internal structural exam, if you are using the third-party option, you are not required to submit a survey report to the Coast Guard following the completion of that activity. But as a reminder, if you are doing these dry dock exams or internal structural exams, and during the course of that exam, you find that the condition of the vessel or the equipment or the systems or the operations of the vessel creates some sort of unsafe condition, you must notify the Coast Guard of that. The cognizant OCMI, where you are conducting that work, should be notified if there is an unsafe condition. Now, what does that mean for a dry dock, for an internal structural exam? A couple of examples that might be considered an unsafe condition. If there's a breach in the hull, if you have severe wastage of your hull or your structural members, clearly those would create an unsafe condition. I see that maybe there's an opportunity for the Coast Guard to provide some additional clarification of what else might constitute an unsafe condition during a dry dock or an internal structural exam. I'd be interested in receiving some feedback either today during the panel or offline after the fact on whether that is something that would be valuable for folks in the industry. Regardless of whether you are using the Coast Guard option or the third-party option, when you do conduct a dry dock or an internal structural exam, it's important to really understand what the expectations are for repairs. If you're conducting something that's considered a replacement in kind, those can be usually done without additional requirements for reporting or additional requirements for design verification. Replacement in kind is defined in the Coast Guard regulations. There's a definition section in 136.110, and that really what it says is something is considered to be a replacement in kind if it's a repair or replacement and it puts something back to the same status as the original specifications. If you're doing any kind of work during your dry dock or ISE and it will not be considered a replacement in kind, then there's a number of different things you need to do, and I want to make sure to outline those today. So you will need to make sure that you communicate your intentions with the Coast Guard if you're a Coast Guard option vessel, or with your TPO if you're a third-party option. And you want to communicate those ahead of time to make sure that any work that you do for this replacement or this work is done in accordance with the requirements. You want to document and keep track of that work that you're doing so that when it comes time for your renewal of your certificate of inspection, you can document that as a modifications. As part of your application for inspection to renew your COI, you must note any modifications that have been conducted since the last certificate of inspection examination. So things that are sometimes included in modifications, so weight changes, an alteration to a system, a change in the purpose of a space, all of those things you need to keep track of and document. Additionally, if you're doing work that's not identified as replacement in kind, you want to follow the steps for design verification. Those are listed in section 144, and that requires the design to be certified by a professional engineer, an authorized classification society, or the Coast Guard. So they have to verify that the design of what you're planning to do is in compliance with the requirements. And then finally, when you're doing something that's not considered replacement in kind, you need to consider whether you should be applying for a major conversion determination. So a major conversion determination has 4 different criteria. Those are items that substantially change the dimensions or the carrying capacity of the vessel. It changes the type of the vessel. It substantially prolongs the life of the vessel, or it changes the vessel so it's essentially a new vessel. A determination for a major conversion should be sent to the Coast Guard's Marine Safety Center, and it should outline all of the things that you're planning to do. And then the Coast Guard will respond to you and tell you, yes, this is considered to be a major conversion, or no, it's not. Chris, you asked me how I envision that the AWO best practices would factor into all of this. So the Coast Guard, once the guide has been reviewed and headquarters has decided there's no further recommendations they have for that document, then we will share that with our field inspectors, and that will absolutely be considered when the Coast Guard is conducting work on or gets notified that the TPO is conducting work for a dry dock exam or an internal structural exam.
Thank you, Captain Phillips. That's provided a lot of clarity. Boy, if that could all be on one page of paper, it would sure help people navigate this process. Because you answered a lot of questions. Obviously, you're speaking for D8, not the entire Coast Guard and all the other sectors. But that's really good information. Rob, I'm going to go to you next, and I know I have some more questions for the captain and for Caitlin. But could you kind of give us? You have a unique perspective, being former Coast Guard Marine inspector, and now, working for a TPO and being an auditor and surveyor. What are your thoughts about the upcoming dry dock and ISE, and how difficult do you think it's going to be? Any other thoughts you might have?
Well, Sabine's in a unique situation that most of the companies that we work with had a pretty strong dry docking system already. So since the implementation of Subchapter M, we've conducted over 37 dry docks, and then some of our companies have already done internal survey portion dry docks, and they've conducted 28 of those. So we've already seen a pretty good data set of what we're going to see out there. Because the best practices really haven't been totally approved by the Coast Guard yet. For the most part, we've been working with our customers to stick with 768. So, in the past, doublers have been all over the place. We are really embracing doublers until the Coast Guard has really approved them, and the shipyards and the welders are experienced with the ASTM standard that talks about the doublers. You just can't just slap a piece of steel up there and weld around it, and that's the repair. So, for the most part, most of our customers have already really embraced doing, regular old inserts, radius corners, those type things. Things that we're seeing the most of it is wastage in the stern void. On most inland tows, the hatch or the manhole for the bow void and the stern void is just a single T-bolt on a strong back. Those don't always seal up the best, and particularly on the intercoastal waterway type boats where they do have some interaction with salt water. You get some salt water in those stern voids, it starts wasting away the stiffeners relatively quickly, especially if a company's not paying attention. So that's when our biggest thing is ensuring that the hatches and the watertight integrity of the vessel, even on deck, is there. And if a company didn't coat their the internals on their stern void and their bow and the bow void if they have one, there's opportunity for a lot of wastage that people didn't really realize it was there. But once we start doing these ISCs, people all of a sudden realize that they have a stern that might not be as strong as they anticipated, and it's going to cost a lot to crop and renew all those stiffeners in the stern. So that's what we've seen so far. Again, we're all at the beginning of all this, but there's something to be learned there right now. And then I look forward to seeing what AWO finally comes out with the final guidelines. I know a lot of our companies would rather embrace that than some of the old school 768 stuff that we're doing right now.
Thanks, Rob. Tava, I know from past experience that TVIB's a different type of TPO in terms of most of their customers use the internal survey program and may do that also for the dry dock and ISE portion of the requirements. Can you tell us a little bit about how that might work in your view, or any other thoughts you have about dry dock and ISE requirements?
Sure, Chris. Thanks for moderating this panel. I appreciate that. I like Caitlin. This is not my strong suit, so I'm going to take a little bit different tactic, as Chris mentioned. And so, we operate and have don't operate, but we have oversight for roughly just a little over 1,000 vessels. And 98% of our TPO customer base has elected to use the internal survey program option. To date, we have conducted 815 annual surveys and only 6 dry dock and ISEs, or internal structural exams at this point. What we found with the annual survey option so far is that our customers are using roughly a 50-50 mix of their qualified staff that have been vetted and accepted by TVIB as internal surveyors, and then balancing out that mix with TVIB certified surveyors to perform those required annual survey activities. We are not expecting to see a dramatic shift in these numbers for the performance of dry dock and ISEs. And of course, with this mixed audience of surveyors comes some unique challenges as we move into training, vetting, and certifying surveyors to conduct these exams. And for us, what we really try to keep right in the forefront is, and never lose sight of, is the idea that both internal surveyors and external surveyors must be both equally capable of providing the same level of professionalism and competency when they're performing the exams, working with the operators, the shipyards, and the Coast Guard to determine appropriate repairs, then verifying that those repairs were made accordingly. And then lastly, documenting those results in a comprehensive survey report. We think that's going to be critical. As Captain Phillips mentioned, the survey report doesn't go in, but when that vessel gets ready to apply for renew its COI, that's when those reports are going to come into the Coast Guard, and they'll begin seeing those. Shifting a little bit now is really touching back on some of what you said in the beginning, Chris, and what we've heard in our first 2 dry dock classes, both from the instructors that we've got presenting a bulk of that material. What they're really telling our students is, what does your TISMUS say? And we think that's a really critical piece. From our experience, many of the TISMUS don't go into significant detail on how an individual company plans to handle specific operational parameters and tolerances across their fleet. If a TISMUS contains verbiage that is or reads more like regulatory language than it does practice and policy, it's not going to go a long way in helping a company manage those dry dock and ISEs very well. What we think, the beauty of the TISMUS option is the ability to provide parameters for the operator to function within. We've got to move from this position, as you mentioned as well, where the port engineer knows everything and has this concept that, well, we always do it that way. That's great, but we've got to get to the point where companies are fully documenting these practices in their TISMUS, and they can point to them as the standard by which they're going to maintain their equipment. Realistically, in the absence of a robust written dry dock and ISE program, an operator is going to be left with those things already mentioned: NAVIC 768, ABS rules, and other policy guidance, which for us, we find lacking at this point. So in closing, one of the things that we have done is we've made some formal requests of the Coast Guard for some additional guidance on these dry dock activities. It's our understanding that there is a dry dock work instruction that is in its final stages, waiting on the final approval. And I really do want to compliment the Towing Vessel Center of National Expertise in the fact that they are staying in touch with us, regularly giving us updates, letting us know that, frankly, they're waiting on some of this guidance as well. It's going to help them. But of course, as dry dock activities are ramping up, really this guidance can't come soon enough. And I want to kind of cut on the back end of something Captain Phillips mentioned. And this is one of the questions, actually, is an interpretation that we sent to the Coast Guard and we're waiting on confirmation on, which runs a little counter to what you mentioned. And that is that if an unsafe condition or a major nonconformity is discovered while a vessel is on dry dock, what we've interpreted at this point is that vessel is currently out of service, so it doesn't present an immediate risk out there, and so that may not require that notification. And we're asking for clarity on that, specifically to what you had mentioned. So that's just one of the types of questions. We've put out 3 interpretations to them based on this very ambiguous language, and then we've asked 3 questions as well. And I did hear from the COE earlier this week. We're expecting some feedback here pretty quickly. So appreciate it. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Tava. Well, Captain Phillips, do you want to take a shot at answering that last question that Tava posed about in-service vessels versus on dry dock out-of-service vessels and reporting of unsafe conditions?
I could definitely tell you how we would approach it here at the 8th District, but knowing that our program offices are taking a look at this right now, I won't give you a firm answer right now. We'll wait and see what they come back with first.
Can you give me a vague answer? All right, I'm not going to pin you down. Caitlin, I had a question about the best practices. I got 2 questions, well, a lot more than that. But anyway, on the best practices, are those made available to all industry as well as just the AWO members? And secondly, do you foresee that these best practices will be incorporated into some type of requirement in the RCP some point down the road?
Happy to take both of those questions. So the answer to the first question is yes. I said that it is for the use of AWO members, but this would be a document that once it's finalized will be posted on the public side of our website on our Subchapter N page. And so it would be there for any industry member who would like to take a look at it. I don't think that we want to be sort of selfish about keeping it from folks for whom it might be helpful. And the answer to the second question is no. We have not had any conversations to this point about incorporating the best practices into the RCP. I think that what we have heard in conversation with our members is that a lot of them have these procedures within their RCP SMS or RCP TISMIS already. And so it's really designed as a toolbox for folks who don't have procedures or who have procedures but are looking to refine them, rather than something that we think is a sort of a one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay, well, thank you. Captain Phillips, if a vessel is on dry dock and somebody requests a determination whether it's a major conversion, can you give me any idea what the timeline would be to get an answer back from the Coast Guard on that type question? And also, does that go to the OCMI and then through the Coast Guard, or do you go directly to headquarters? What's the process flow for getting those answers? Because you may run into this while you got a vessel on dry dock, and maybe it's completely unexpected. How quickly that can be turned around is pretty important to industry.
Great question. Yeah. So a major conversion determination goes straight to the Marine Safety Center at headquarters. And typically that's for when you have planned work ahead of time. You already know you want to change equipment, you want to change systems, you want to do major updates to the spaces on board, you want to do major changes to the hull. I envision that many of the situations where you put a vessel up on dry dock and then you realize that there needs to be a significant amount of work done would mostly be work done to replace what was already there. So you put the vessel up on dry dock, then you realize there's significant corrosion in this area, there's structural members that need to be replaced, and then you would be doing something where you would replace it in kind, put back what it was originally or very, very close to original specifications. And so that wouldn't require the major conversion determination. So hopefully there wouldn't be a situation where you would put it up on dry dock and then realize that you needed to make a request for a major conversion determination. Usually those things are done ahead of time.
I know we've had situations where a vessel maybe struck an object and sank, and so then they put it up on dry dock and find out they've got to do a lot of work. And while they've got it there, let's go ahead and extend the cabin area, or let's enclose a working space that was previously open, something like that. So they might be in the process and they're getting ready to spend a lot of money. They don't want to make it a new vessel. They want to maintain their existing vessel status if they can. Any rough idea as to how long it takes the Coast Guard to work through that?
So most of the time, the Marine Safety Center does respond to submissions within 30 days. Sometimes they have a much shorter turnaround time. It could be 20 days. I see how that would be a unique situation. And so maybe they could work with the OCMI to communicate the unique circumstances of that situation and why that determination would need to be expedited through the process and looked at quicker.
Okay, good. Rob, what can you describe the differences that operators need to be aware of, and maybe more importantly, shipyards, the difference in hull repairs pre-sub-M and post-sub-M?
Well, I think the biggest one, and it's been discussed by several people here on the board, is the actual use of doublers and when they're going to be, from what we've seen in the past, doublers were used to fix holes wherever there were holes or wherever there was some light, some wastage or whatnot. You just slapped a plate up there, you welded all the way around it, and then you went back to work. And I think that is the biggest thing that a lot of smaller shipyards that have exclusively worked on tugs or on hopper barges have to learn, that those aren't necessarily the best practices, or not the best practices now, or not even within the regulations now. And I know there are certain situations that doublers can be used, but there is an ASTM standard for those. But for the most part, the recognized way to repair a hole in the hull, or even some wasted plate, is with an insert, and with radius corners, and going past some frames, and basically replacing the plate in kind. That's the way that tank barges have been done forever. That's the way that 768 really is telling all inspected vessels to be repaired. So that's the big difference. Now, once the guidelines from AWO come out and the Coast Guard's bless them, then the relaxation of the requirements of 768 might be possible, and might be a great thing for some operators. But that's, I think, the biggest difference is truly the doubler question.
How do you, what do you all recommend to your clients as to differentiating between a old doubler and an area that maybe would be fixed with a doubler today, but shouldn't be, ought to go comply with 768? I mean, you may have old patches and new patches. How's the Coast Guard supposed to know which is which?
I don't know the answer to that one. I know when we go to a dry dock or we talk to a company about some damage that was done in the repairs, we're drawing the line in the sand, presently, if, we're telling them if it's a repair right now, and until something else is, we're told something else, it should be a full insert, a proper insert. Any doublers from the past, or any doublers that we can't identify, that we don't know when they got installed, until we're told otherwise, until the Coast Guard comes out with some kind of other policy, those doublers stay. So this is once we get this information from AWO and the Coast Guard has vetted it could change a lot of things. But I think right now, if damage is right now or a dry dock is right now, people should be doing, true inserts.
Captain, you want to elaborate on that? I've been saying to some of our customers that it might be a good idea to kind of have a visual map of where the old patches are on their hulls, so that they could document that this was an existing patch. Because I think we all know after a couple of years, all the patches look the same. They get some ring growth on them or get painted over or whatever. You want to elaborate on your thoughts about that?
I think that's excellent guidance to give companies right now, that document the existing doublers, keep the existing doublers for now until we provide additional clarification, and plan that any new damage that's identified should be replaced with inserts. That's really good guidance for now.
Okay. Tab, when an existing vessel has repair replacements to a specific area of that vessel, what would trigger that vessel to be changed to a new vessel status?
Well, so that's actually very similar to a question that we've submitted to the Coast Guard. And our real concern with that issue is, you've got a specific area of the vessel and you've done some repairs or replacement that have now triggered the new vessel status. The question is coming up is, does that now layer over the entire vessel, or does it only apply to that area with which the repair or the replacement was made? And, because we have that question in, I'm sort of like Captain Phillips. I can't make a hard and fast statement. That's one where we would have to go and seek that guidance. We sort of lean to the idea that it should layer over just that impacted area and not the entire vessel. But that's one of those areas where we really are seeking guidance on.
Okay, great. What I know that with TVIB's internal survey, customers, what is TVIB doing to make sure that those internal surveyors that maybe are not traditional surveyors do know how to survey the vessel, create a report that looks like a survey report that will document the compliance?
So we've rolled out our process for that, and we really have two different types of an internal surveyor and an external. And honestly, the qualifications between the two are no different. We have the exact same expectations of an internal surveyor that we would as someone going out. The only difference for us is whether or not they go through the full stage of obtaining that credential, which would allow them to hang a shingle and go out and do that work independently, vice just doing that work for their employer only. But the standards for the two, the requirements, the qualifications that we're looking for are the same. And one of probably the key component that we're doing to ensure that is not just sitting through a class and did you participate? Did you pass your test? Those sorts of things. But we've implemented, we sort of refer to it as a check ride, but it's a field verification process where we're going to require that all that expect to be able to perform these activities have to go out with what we're referring to as a designated examiner and do practical demonstrations of these activities. And then the other component of that is producing the report. The report writing aspect, we have found, is something that is an art oftentimes and has to be taught. And so we're working through that, and we've got a process where we can work through that and coach them along the way. But the biggest piece of that for us is that practical demonstration of those knowledge and the abilities to go out, identify the items, decide and work with the shipyard, the operators on appropriate repairs, and then verify those repairs.
Very good. This is a question that has come in from the audience, and I'll just read it. This is for anybody, couldn't laser scanning play a role in documenting existing conditions of base lining previous surveys, inspections that could be referenced in a follow-on survey / inspection maps of previous conditions? So I think the question basically is getting at, can you take a laser image of the vessel that would indicate where these patches have been applied to the vessel. What's your all's thoughts about that? Rob, you have insights?
I definitely think they could use it. I mean, a laser imaging of the hull is a great thing. However, let's face it, the vast majority of the inland towing vessel companies aren't going to spend that kind of money to get a laser image of each hull that they own. I mean, it's an added cost that really would be great to have, but I don't think it's, the value added might not be there versus a guy grabbing a sketchbook and drawing a picture of the hull and saying, there's a 2x2 insert here, a doubler here, and a 4x18 doubler there, and stuff like that. So I think it would be great to have. I just wonder about the cost of the operation.
I got you. Okay. Captain Phillips, we get another question from the audience as to, for existing vessels or older vessels that may not have original drawings showing the scantlings of what the hull plate was originally. What is your recommendation on how that would be determined for future plate replacements?
Great question. I know that this will likely come up on a lot of existing vessels. The recommendation I would have is to have a conversation with the Coast Guard or with your TPO, depending on what option you are. And I would encourage companies to provide a proposal. They could explore different options. Maybe there's a certain section of the hull that needs to be removed for a replacement. And so when they take that out, they can measure the thickness of the hull and then document that, and that becomes the baseline for that section of the hull. Or maybe the company would like to propose that they do a one-time hull gauging of the entire hull to kind of document a baseline. There's different approaches that can be taken depending on the age of the vessel, the condition of the vessel, what it looks like when you put it up on dry dock. So there's a lot of different options there, and I think step one is starting the conversation about it and trying to present a proposal on how the company would like to approach it, and that'll start the discussion.
Yeah, I know. We've been asked this question previously ourselves, and one of the issues is the bottom you're looking at may not be the original bottom. It's already been replaced once or other times, or that section of the hull. So taking a piece out of it or doing the audio gauge on that hull doesn't really tell you what the original was, especially if it was overbuilt at some point. So it's a very tricky question, and I suspect that you're going to hear more about that, especially some of the 50-year-old vessels that still are functioning just fine, but they've got a section that needs to be shored up or replaced or whatever. So, okay. Another question that's come in. This is for any of the panelists. Do you think that we're going to have enough dry docks to conduct all of these dry docks surveys and ISEs? Rob, Tava, Captain?
I guess we really don't know the answer to that question. I think it's going to be very geographically dependent. I mean, down here in the Gulf, with the offshore industry kind of on a slump, I think there's plenty of dry docks. If push comes to shove, that the towing industry could take advantage of, just because there's not as many crew boats and OSVs going up on dry docks. But up river and in the inland portion, I think there could be some areas where there's going to have a big backlog of vessels trying to get on dry dock. And everybody's got to keep in mind that with these regulatory dry docks, dry dock is probably going to be longer than you would normally expect. Because either A, you got to wait for the Coast Guard to come on board, or you got to wait for your TPO to get on board. You got to have a discussion what the findings are. Hopefully that port engineer has done a really good job of outlining what's going to be done on the dry dock, so that there's no surprises when the the TPO or the coastie comes on board to do the dry dock exam, but there's a very, very likely possibility that that surveyor or the inspector is going to find something more that's going to cost you more time, and potentially require you to get additional steel brought in, or not like the looks of the shaft or the prop or something like that, that will extend your time on dry dock. So that's going to affect everybody behind you also.
Sure.
So it's a more of a scheduling and planning issue that's really going to hurt some people, I think, in the inland system.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Captain
Chris,
Phillips, go ahead, Tevin.
I was just going to say, I would kind of add to that, there all the way back to the TSAC process, there were fears and concerns that there would not be dry dock space when you had, nearly 6,000 vessels that were going to have to go up. And I think Rob hit on it right there at the end, and that's scheduling. This is a phase-in period on the COIs. You really should be looking to sort of phase in your dry dock scheduling as well, and really not wait till the end of the time period, because as more vessels come online, then that's more that are going to need that dry dock space. And so getting in sooner rather than later, and not only that, that's just going to allow you to set your long-term schedule over time, so that if you grouped all your dry docks together, that's probably not where you want to be financially. So spreading those out.
Good advice. Captain Phillips, one last question. We're about to wrap up. And that is how is the Coast Guard going to look at internal survey programs versus third-party survey programs and versus Coast Guard inspections? Are you all going to track how each of those various ways to conduct these inspections are delivering on vessel compliance?
Good question. We are not there yet, but I imagine in the future we would try to capture some metrics on each of the different options. We don't have the system set up right now, but it is a good plan to try and look at that in the future.
Very good. Well, with that, I think we've raised quite a few issues and answered some questions, I think. I want to thank each of the panelists for participating today and for giving us the opportunity to do this. I think we covered a lot of ground. Couldn't answer all the questions that we had that came in, but I appreciate everybody's participation and attention. And with that, I will turn this back over to John Schulenberg from Waterways Journal. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks very much, Chris, and all the panelists. That was a lot of great information. And again, I want to thank Simplex Americas for sponsoring this session. If you missed part of the session or you want to go back and review it, all of our IMX education sessions will be available. They're being recorded and they'll be available on this website until Thanksgiving. Coming up in the Inland Marine Expo, we have several webinars during the lunch hour and early afternoon, focusing on Tier 3 solutions, container shipping, and women and millennials in maritime. Then at 2 p.m. Central, there will be 2 more education sessions, managing risks through MSAs and charter agreements, and impacts of the Mississippi River ship channel deepening. Also, please take some time to visit the expo floor and networking lounge. Both will be open until IMX closes at 4 p.m. today. Again, thank you very much, and that concludes this session.